Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, been a long time follower of your work, and recently you started kind of unpacking some more remote-oriented work of your own, which prompted me to reach out. But I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation.
Likewise. Yeah.
Yeah, so by now folks have heard a little bit more about you and your work, in the intro. But I would love to just, you're onto a new venture yet again. So I'd love to kind of, in your own words, just tell us about FYI and kind of what the mission, vision, like what you're working on over there.
Yeah. With FYI, it's at usefyi.com. And what we discovered is that the number one problem people have with documents is finding them, and particularly finding them across all the different services they use. So it's G Suite, Dropbox, Box, Evernote, and then the list goes on. We launched about a year ago, and we have about 20 integrations right now and counting. And what we do is we help you find your documents in 3 clicks or less. So we let you search for documents, of course, but we also have built an interface with a Chrome extension that opens in a new tab that helps you find things that are recently being worked on, find things based on people that you think might have shared something with you or that they created it, or get really quickly into a view where you can see the files on any of the tools that you've integrated. So yeah, just
Excellent.
going after it. And the next thing we're working on right now is basically working on building out a product for teams. So yeah.
That's brilliant, man. Yeah, I think, even in my own company's work, we've really seen this fragmentation of where all your documents are stored, and
Yeah.
then not only in your own company, but also in doing any sort of client work.
Yep.
They have their own box or Dropbox, whatever it might be. So yeah, you're solving a huge problem, which is really cool.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I guess, obviously the conversation at hand, dealing with distributed teams, remote work, you're no stranger to running remote companies. Not one, but now three, or more. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Are there
Yeah.
more
There's
than
been
three?
quite a few since '03. All of my companies have been remote. And at one point we had a office at one of mine, but it was still a distributed team at the same time. Over half the team was still not in the office, and in many other places in the U.S. as well as all across the world. So
Mhm.
tons of experience and observations and opinions about it as well. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and so I understand, I don't know if it was KISSmetrics, but in that kind of hybrid model where you had some folks who are remote and some folks who are co-located, what was the dynamic there? Were there any kind of challenges that you guys had to navigate in kind of having almost two groups of people that are distinct?
Yeah, the key is to not have anybody that feels like a second class citizen of the company, so to speak. And so we would do a lot of things like where even though the all hands, we would sort of lead it, so to speak, from the office. We'd have everyone in the office. Once we figured out this was a problem, we'd have everyone in the office actually join it from their computers
Hmm.
using Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever we were using at the time. And so there were a lot of things that we did deliberately to make it so that this distributed workforce feeling was kind of very positive, and you never felt like you were missing out because you weren't in the office. And did our best to do that. I think it's it's a struggle, but you have to figure it out depending on what kind of mode you want. So you know it's definitely easier, no matter how you look at it, for being one way or another. So being either one office or completely distributed as a company, which we now call remote work or remote. And then there's the other hybrids. And if you think about this, none of this is old. Like companies would have offices in many different places across the world
Mhm.
and have different locations as they scale and they went global and all this kinds of stuff. So we have been doing this for a while. I think what's different now is we're working from home, and we're working from co-working places. We're working from coffee shops, and that I think creates a different dynamic than ever before.
Absolutely. And I wanted to touch on something that you brought up, which was once it became a problem. So, what kind of put that on your radar as, okay, we have something that's broken here. We need to kind of fix maybe the culture that's at stake. Was it just as simple as somebody coming up and saying, hey, this is a problem? Or was there a decline in productivity? Like, what was maybe a signpost for you guys to see, okay, we have to do something about this?
We really believe in feedback and doing reviews of things or postmortems, and we have for a long time. I think I believe it now more than ever. partly because my co-founder Marie is really big on the idea of postmortems,
Mhm.
retrospectives, and things like that on everything we do. And so what we would do back in that day is we would actually send out a survey after different meetings and really learn and get feedback from the team. So the feedback would come in. Sometimes we would do it monthly, just normally, like just how are you feeling about the company? Other times for projects, initiatives, or even meetings like the all hands meeting, we would literally send out a survey, get people's feedback, and then we get to figure out kind of what to do next.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. You're eating your own dog food just as a product-minded individual yourself. You're always trying to get feedback from users, but it's no different with your team, right?
That's right.
They're stakeholders in your company, so it's really smart. So great. You had, one experience where it was more the hybrid model. Maybe there's a few bumps in the road that you needed to iron out a little bit, and then you've had other. I'm assuming Crazy Egg and FYI are both kind of remote from the beginning.
Yep, yep. They both have been remote since day one, and it's yeah, it's been great that so many people are talking about it. I also have advised a few different remote companies, including Buffer and Automatic,
Mhm.
makers of WordPress .com and .org, and so we I've seen a lot of these companies evolve and scale and go through different challenges and things like that. So like I said, it's much different way of working, I would say, than if you're in an office. And people are having to figure out individually what really makes them tick, right? What makes them get their best work done, regardless of where they are in the world, as well as where they're working from. And
Totally.
I wouldn't even say it's for everyone yet, right?
I would agree.
It takes a certain mentality.
It does. Yeah, it's funny. So we actually had a guest from Automatic on this podcast, and so being able to see things at a really large scale, but then also
Yep.
seeing folks who are just starting out, a lot of the same challenges are there, obviously just at different levels of scale. One thing that I've seen you write about or speak about, can't remember which, is this idea that communication, that writing, that documentation is really really important at any stage in a remote company. What are some
Yep.
of the ways that you guys have tried to document processes early on to get ahead of that and understand, when you're onboarding
Yeah,
people?
there's a few different things. So number one, we have a channel on Slack that's called Daily Updates, and in that channel, everyone is sharing across the whole company what they worked on yesterday, what they're working on today, and if they have like tickets to share, like that they can link to, if they're engineers working on some of that stuff, they put that in there. So we have a channel where I can go right now, called Daily Updates, and see exactly what people are working on and what they working on today, work they worked on yesterday, and it's basically require that you post that every day.
Got it. Yeah. So I imagine
So
that people are in different time zones as well too. So that makes it
yeah,
asynchronous, a little easier for people to check
yeah.
in.
So that's probably the number one thing I would suggest. Even if we worked in an office, I'd probably do that if we're using Slack or something like that, and make sure that people are posting what they're working on. That gives you a like visibility you normally wouldn't get, and even as the team grows, it's been fine. And if you really get to a larger and larger scale, you can do that just for different team channels, right? And
Mhm.
sort of break it out like that. And I found that to be really, really useful. And one of the most impactful things we've done, that's not really documentation, it's more like awareness, accountability, things like that. Because one of the worst things that happens in a company, regardless of what type of company or what kind of whatever way the workforce is sort of set up and distributed, is that people don't know what other people are working on. And I think with remote work, it gets even worse, where like you might not know that the other person's actually working on something for days on end, or what they're doing, and then start questioning their productivity and things like that, right? So
Right.
this is a way to stop that. Um, I think this is a good thing that we've done. Another thing that we do is we document a lot of things. One example is today. I don't think I've really shared too much about this, but like my co-founder Marie and I at FYI, we have a document that's a shared document, and it literally has the day of the week and
Mhm.
what both of us are working on, and also what we worked on together as well, or what we're
Wow.
planning on doing together. And so we have the daily updates channel. This is really helpful because she can see things I'm working on, I can see things she's working on more granularity, and it's almost like a shared to-do list. And we are able to comment on the work, right? Or comment like, hey, I need help with this, or got a question on
Hmm.
this. It's just free flowing. I'm going to actually really briefly pull up that document
Oh,
because
great. Awesome.
it's real. It's 330 pages now.
Oh my God.
And as of today, I can say we started it about within the last 2 years. So it'll be almost
Wow.
2 years in July that we started that document, and it's in Google Docs, and it loads really slowly,
Amazing.
and it's all good. You know, it's like full.
Yep.
So, and it's not like we go back or anything. It's just like,
Right.
you know, and I'm sure we will at some point, maybe not. But the whole point is like we're sitting there and we're like, okay, this is how we make sure that we're aligned, right? So there's a
Right.
lot of things about alignment, expectation management, knowing what other people are working on without getting into like micromanagement or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is like we're all here to do work. When you're in office, you can talk to each other about work. You can go right down the hall and bump into each other, so to speak. You can go walk right into an office together for like 5 minutes and talk about something. It's not quite the same, right? Like you don't want to bother each other. But you also still always want to know what other people on your team are working on, right? It's such a critical component of getting stuff done. So yeah, you know, I've gone even further, and we document a lot of things. We have, like, if we're going to do like a launch, we have a schedule for the launch, right?
Hmm.
And because we have to coordinate across multiple people, multiple time zones, right? And we take advantage of that, right? Like, if we
Right.
launch something on Product Hunt, and one of our team members is actually in a place where midnight Pacific time was usually when you kind of post or right around there, he can either still be up or he'll get up like super early his time and it's like 3 a.m. our time, but it's like the morning his time or even the afternoon. Like things get really like things are awesome that way, right? You have more coverage
Yeah.
and things like that. So we use this to our advantage, I would say, when I see a lot of folks looking at remote work and looking at all the disadvantages, which is fine. But how do we use this way of working to our advantage? And also like I think there are a lot of naysayers or people who are just tired of hearing about it. And so even though I've done remote work for so many years, it's just work to me. I don't
Right.
really, you know, differentiate it. People ask me lots of questions about it, but at the end of the day, it's just work. And a lot of the documentation that we do, we're probably doing, we have about a dozen people right now, and we're probably doing it a little bit earlier than if we were in office. Like you probably do the kind of stuff we do at 30, right? Around the
Right.
documentation, the processes, schedules for things. But at the same time, if you want something to get done better next time, and it's something at work that you're already doing and that you feel like you're going to have to do again,
Hmm.
why wouldn't you do some of this stuff? Why wouldn't you do postmortems? Why wouldn't you have documentation for what you're getting done? Right? Like just jamming on things is great, but like getting organized, getting making things repeatable. You know, another thing that I've noticed is that we're very prescriptive of our meetings, and we've learned that we need agendas as much as possible, and we need outcomes for the meetings, and ideally we have documentation that's created. So we have every meeting that we have that's recurring has some form of an agenda, or it's just an outcome like, hey, we're just going to talk, right, about what's going on in terms of product, right? So we have a weekly product meeting. It was actually a couple hours ago today, and that one doesn't have an agenda, but everyone knows they just go around and talk about what they're working on, what they worked on, and that's it, right? It's not even challenges or
Right.
anything like that because those usually come out in other discussions. Um, and then our one-on-ones always have an agenda, right? And someone's responsible for the document. Usually it's actually not the manager, but the person who is getting managed, so to speak, on the one-on-one. So there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that I feel like is just good stuff for work, not necessarily remote work or not. So that's my
Right.
rant on remote work and sort of some of the things based on documentation and your
Well, let's
question.
shut it down here, man. There's nothing else that needs to be said. That was
Yeah, we're
great.
done. Dropping the bike. That's good. I like it. He's
So
joking.
no,
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing you say though is, it does require a new level of intentionality, which can actually help clarify your thinking, which I think is a really beneficial, byproduct of having to write everything down, having to have everything programmed and processed.
Yep. That's my belief. That's what I've seen work for me. It also relates to some of the things that we've been digging into. So we did recently with a company called Miro that used to be called Real Time Board. Us at FYI and them surveyed about 500 people and understood what their challenges are with remote work and remote work meetings and things like that. And so I'll list out some of the things that we learned because
Be
that
great.
report is being, as of this recording, is being worked on. By the time this is public, it'll be out there, so I'm sure there'll be a link to it.
For
Um,
sure.
and So what we learned is that these are the 4 top challenges with remote work. So number 1 is communication. Number 2 is social connection. Number 3 is organic interaction, which I think people are just missing, right? With remote work. And then the 4th one is actually setting boundaries. And this was based on open-ended responses. It was not multiple choice. I know a lot of other folks do multiple choice surveys. We actually love to do open-ended responses. So this is 500 people's responses when we asked them, what are the top challenges for remote work? And there are a bunch of others, but these were the ones. And if you think about this, a lot of this has to do with social related things inside the company, as well as relationships inside the company and how you sort of communicate and get stuff done. So
Definitely.
that was one big highlight. Another one that I wanted to share was really fun, actually. So what we learned, and we're still doing the exact count, but it's basically over 90% of people who responded to the survey said that remote work is a good fit for them.
Hmm.
And then over 90% of people who responded to the survey also said that they'd recommend remote work to a friend. So
Some pretty high praise. Yeah.
yeah, so like there's something about remote work, and you can understand why the hype is there.
Right, right. Well, that's I think something to get back to what you were saying before. It's just work, right? But people do start equating remote work with autonomy and being self-directed and having a little bit more control over their day or what they're working on. And I think at least in the folks that I'm speaking to, and it sounds like the folks that you surveyed, they're kind of hitting in on that, right? It's about the freedom and the autonomy that they're able to get back into their lives through something like this.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's a big deal.
So I know, I think you're seeing a really unique perspective in that, outside of the products that you've built and the companies that you've built, you've also advised or invested in, I think it's well north of 100 companies. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. About
Yes.
120 companies. Yeah.
And so I know like that role of an advisor or, an early stage investor, sometimes the best value there can be to offer a dissenting opinion or to be a little bit contrarian or to kind of shatter some assumptions that founders might have. What kind of maybe negative feedback or concerns or worries have you encountered when you suggest remote models or you comment on remote just in general as an option for some of these companies?
Yeah, I generally don't actually suggest it or comment on it. It's
Hmm.
usually something that a team either wants to do or doesn't. So that's the
Cool.
first thing I'll say. I'm probably not very prescriptive like that. I really focus on what their needs are.
Hmm.
But one of the big things that I hear that come back from people is um, like most people don't know how to manage when they start a company. They're not managers, especially first time founders, sometimes even second time founders, right? And so I think there's a lot of nitpicks that people have around management and concerns they have when it comes to remote work, right? That there's a lot of like cost advantage, especially early on. There's a lot of like efficiency advantage if you understand what that looks like and feels like.
Hmm.
What I hear the most is that, this apprehension around, well, if I can't see them, if I can't go talk to them, if they're not in the same room, um, wow, like, what do I do? Right. So I hear this pushback when people are debating remote, and I just tell them, well, like, you just get more discipline. And intentionality, as you said, is like just next level,
Right.
and that's what you do. That's it. That's the solution. But let's not make it more complicated. But yet, as humans, we like to make everything complicated, right?
Totally. Yeah. And the smarter you are, the more overcomplicated you like to make
Absolutely. Yeah.
everything.
Or the smarter you believe you are, right? So, like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I think another unique perspective that you bring is, having been so close to product, right? Having, at least 3 software companies and maybe others that you've even tried to get off the ground that might not have gone as far as the other ones. But I think one piece of feedback that we'll get from folks that are considering a remote model is, how do we have a culture of innovation? How do we have those, serendipitous moments where, people are just stumbling upon some new feature, some new breakthrough? How do you guys continue to innovate and evolve? Like, besides like the daily kind of update or like an all hands meeting, like what are some of the ways that you guys, are able to be creative together effectively?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I would say that like the thing that's most important is realizing that the work involves basically input and output, right? So it's like things that you're doing to do the work, and then the results of that work. And
Hmm.
so, there are concepts that I think about a lot, such as making time for having certain types of meetings, whether it's leadership team meetings and making sure those are happening on a regular basis, making sure your one-on-ones are pretty solid with agendas and responsibilities and things like that. Another really big one that I found a lot tougher to figure out remotely is this idea of splitting up and being clear about roles and responsibilities.
Hmm.
And that has a lot to do with the stage of the company. So for the longest time, my co-founder and I, let's say for FYI specifically, because we work on a few things, we were doing a lot of the same work. We were both doing interviews and research and doing product work and growth and, talking to engineering and dealing with marketing and things like that. And more recently, we literally wrote up a document about splitting up our roles and responsibilities and even shared it with the team. So this whole thing about roles and responsibilities and who do they go to for something and all that became more clear. With just
Hmm.
12 people, we didn't have really like as many one-on-ones or direct reports and like that structure. So we started divvying that up too and said, okay, like, who's going to technically manage who or who's responsible for whom,
Hmm.
things like that. So I would say that like one of the things that we do is we spend a lot of time and we're very deliberate about how the company operates, how it runs, and how we better ourselves and evolve. And I think change is one of the biggest things that we really focus on, which is it time to change? And really figuring out if it's time to change, we change, right? And what
Hmm.
does that change need to look like? And usually ideally you're changing because you want to make something better. You're not changing because you hit a big brick wall.
Sure.
And I think it's really easy to like hit a big brick wall and then change. And I've done that in the past as well. And going forward, we have, I think, a greater amount of awareness of being able to communicate when things aren't working, or when we see an opportunity. And ideally, you communicate that opportunity instead of communicate the problem, right? Because you want to prevent the problem. You want to be preventative about some of the things in your business, whether it's slowing down of the growth of the business, or simple things that actually end up being complicated. Which is like if two people are talking about a third person in the company, not in obviously the best light, but like in some negative way or some way where it's like critical of that person.
Mhm.
What do you do? Like there's a lot of rules and theories around this, but like I think the simple thing is, how do you treat everyone like humans, right? So yeah, maybe you're upset at someone or you're worried about their performance or something like that. Generally the best thing to do is find the words to tell them, right? That's the way I'd say it, because there's a lot of adages like, don't speak of people in a way that you wouldn't speak to them directly.
Sure.
But like that's like such a high bar as a human, right? Someone upsets you or something happens, it usually has something to do with your stuff, right?
Right.
And has very little to do with them. At the same time, we don't necessarily communicate. Uh, we can't always communicate appropriately to the person directly. So we tend to spend a lot of time uh, when we need to discuss people in a positive way to figure out how to make everybody better. And so there's just a different
Hmm.
approach to that. And then we change processes, right, in order to affect change in that way.
Brilliant. I love it. Yeah. So when it comes to a lot of remote companies that have been doing this for any sort of time, it sounds like a common thread has been an in-person meetup, and the interval and how frequently people meet obviously differs based on how large the team is and where the company's at. But do you do that, or do you do that now? And have you done that in any other previous companies? Is have like an ongoing
We,
meetup?
we've done some of that. We don't do that now at FYI.
Mhm.
We probably will start doing it at some point, but the team is small and they're scattered all over the world. And again, I advise companies that do this, right? And
Yep.
my friend Stelly at Close.com, he also does this. I do a podcast with him at the Startup Chat.
Hmm.
It's called the Startup Chat, and we talk about this a little bit around retreats and stuff like that. I don't think we've ever formalized it as much as I'd probably want to do in the future as the company scales.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, I find that it's nice for everyone to see each other. Um, People do look forward to it on a team if done well. Some companies do it multiple times a year. I'm not sure if we're that type of company, right? I'm not
Yeah,
even sure if we'll ever really, really double down on it, but it is something that like is worth exploring, right? In my mind,
sure.
it's almost like, well, why can't we get everyone out to actually not work,
Right,
right?
right.
Part of the reason is we don't work in person. We should be able to work not in person and be very great at that as a company.
Mhm.
So when we get together, I always have this thing about like I don't want people to feel like we get together and something amazing happens because we were together from a work standpoint. That
Sure.
always like sort of like I like the concept obviously, but I feel like if you're doing remote work, is that really what you want? Is that really like what you want to like sort of incentivize on the team? So I guess I'm either overthinking it, which we do as humans, like we said earlier, or I'm just looking to be very deliberate about reasoning. And I'd rather have the team have a fun time. I'd rather have the
Yeah.
team celebrate. That's where my head is, right? And sure, if some work stuff happens or something cool happens, or it's really useful to be in person for a work thing, great. But like, why can't we just celebrate when we're in person? Right. Then
Right.
you're looking forward to the celebration of some outcome or something like that that the company accomplished, whether it's another year pass or whatever.
Sure.
So those are the things in my head. I've never really like had the energy to explore this before. So thanks for the question, but that's the way I think about it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I love hearing you kind of work it out, even in conversation here. I mean, we did our first one last year,
Yeah.
and we intentionally didn't really put much of any work into it. Maybe we had a couple of sessions that were like really good potential brainstorming times, but
Sure.
opening up that space was really important because so much of our communication is transactional throughout the course of the year. That is really nice to have open ended timelines just to hang out with people, get to know them better as human beings, get to understand like what they like, what they, what foods they hate, like just little things that are hard to kind of get in the Slack channel was really, really great to kind of get that in person. That's
Yep.
cool.
Um,
So when it comes to, so I don't know, I think you're again in a really cool position that you speak to a lot of companies. You are able to kind of see trajectories across a lot of companies and where they're going and kind of what's working, what's not. But as you think about, so this idea of the future of work, right, and kind of like where things are headed, call it 10 years, 15, the time isn't so much as important as some future date. How do you see, remote work and the growth of remote work affecting kind of areas of innovation like Silicon Valley or a New York City? Like, do we see, I don't know, do we see a weakening of those kind of centers of gravity that have typically been associated with, with the startup community? Or like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on just kind of the future of work, where it's going, how it kind of impacts the way companies get funded, started, et cetera?
yeah. One topic people don't really talk about much is um, why remote work has like become more of a thing. And one thing that I've noticed is that it's just, and this is factual, it's easier than ever to build software, right? So now that it's easier than ever to build software because of Amazon Web Services, all the knowledge out there, a new programming framework or language showing up like every day, basically, um, you don't need a lot of investment. You don't need investment like venture capital in order to start something. And so there are more things being started self-funded. A lot of people call it bootstrap. I call it self-funded because I think that makes more sense
Mm-hmm.
as a terminology. And then some people go to customer funded, which whatever, self-funded. Like if I started it and I funded it myself, I think it's self-funded. Sure,
Yeah.
eventually it becomes customer funded. Fine. Um, that has led to folks wanting to be more efficient. And so if you're self-funded, it's likely you're going to start remote in some capacity. Very,
Mm-hmm.
very likely. So I think that's a big factor that folks don't really kind of recognize, that like there's more self-funded companies. So what does that imply for the future? I think companies are going to be self-funded for longer before they raise capital.
Hmm.
And as that keeps happening and these self-funded companies want to raise capital, which is not really happening because like once you're self-funded and you start making some money, maybe you don't want capital, right?
What's
Maybe it
the
doesn't
point?
matter to
Yeah.
you. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're not seeing today is enough venture capitalists funding remote companies,
Hmm.
right? You have Envision that's almost like, I don't know, 800, 700 people or something.
Series
You have,
Z. Yeah.
right, exactly. So they got funded. That's cool.
Right.
You have Automatic that's like 900 people. Then you have a number of others, like there's GitLab and a number of other companies that are venture backed, And
Hmm.
they have a bunch of capital. They're fully remote. But has a fully remote company went public? Yeah, one has. Upwork has, right?
Hmm.
And
Yep.
so then they're fully remote, and I think thousands of people, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the exact numbers. And so we are obviously going to see more remote companies or fully distributed teams go public.
Hmm.
And we're going to see what the sort of results look like. And
Wow.
I think that's going to really change how venture capital either embraces this more or
Hmm.
shuns away from it. And then that will impact if there's going to be more self-funded businesses, or like the idea of if there's actually not self-funded, there are always going to be self-funded businesses with fully remote teams, fully distributed teams. I'm not so sure about venture funded teams because the evidence needs to exist in order for investors to really buy into it. And the
Sure.
evidence for them is these companies went public or these companies sold for significant amounts of money. When you think about acquirers, acquirers have offices, they have HR teams, they have people, right? People teams. They have all this in place. It's not designed around remote work.
Right.
Sure, Envision is, Automatic is, GitLab is, but you're not talking about a 10,000 person company,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
there are these factors that are either, you could say in one perspective, holding us back. On another perspective, it's just simply they're going to play out. And depending
Right.
on how they play out is going to determine what happens next in terms of how many more companies end up being distributed, as well as how much funding goes into distributed companies and how acceptable it is.
Wow.
It might take a while for it to be acceptable enough that money gets poured into sort of more and more distributed companies.
That is a really, really fascinating observation. I think you're right. On some level, this just has to play out. It's hard to predict which way it's going to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, a huge exit like that for kind of a remote-based company would legitimize, a potential exit for other companies and then lure in the investors. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to think too, like, when we think of an automatic, just approaching 1,000 employees or whatever, 900 or whatever it is, what needs to change about the infrastructure, and then what kind of opportunities does that open up, even in the product landscape, to enable things at even another multiple of scale, like you said, 10,000 people. Like, what would it take to enable that type of work in a remote environment? It'd be really interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I think it's happening, right? Like Matt Mullenweg has started a podcast of his own about distributed work. His first interview was the CEO of Upwork,
Hmm.
um, and so we're going to see more content, more best practices developed, if you want to call it that. Like I literally don't understand why folks don't have this daily updates channel in
Right.
Slack or
Right.
Teams or whatever they use. I don't get it. I don't see the harm in it. And I don't, and just to be very prescriptive, you don't need a tool for it. You don't
Yeah.
need a tool. Like we actually literally have a pinned deck that talks about what the best practices for doing the daily updates are, right? Because there's
Nice.
things around vacations and people want guidance on what to write because they're not used to it, right? It's not that big
Right.
of a deal. We have instructions. We don't need a tool, right?
Yep.
I
Read
think a
it.
tool would get in
Write
the
it.
way. Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a best practice that if I were to be prescriptive, which I tend not to be, I'd say you got to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's really just a game changer in terms of getting the team really involved in understanding what everyone's working on. And I can harp on that all day because I look for the like 3 things you can do, right?
Mhm.
Not the 100 things that you need to do because I think
Right.
that gets really daunting. So we're just going to see more best practices out there, more opinionated versions of what needs to be done, why, and how, and these companies coming out. And you know, I know like folks really want to build remote tools and things like that, but work is just work, right? It's just work. We're still doing the same work. A lot of us, especially in tech, are doing work like this in front of a computer and getting it done and typing on our keyboards, and like just doing stuff, right? Writing lots of words or, designing pretty pictures, right? If you're a designer or, looking in code all day and you're still in front of a computer, you just happen to be not around other people that are doing the same thing you are necessarily, right? Like
Right.
I work from my house, believe it or not. I'm sitting on a beanbag right now,
Yes. Love being
right?
back.
Like I'm sitting on a beanbag. It is the most comfortable thing I can sit on. It's a beanbag from Muji. It's not the cheapest beanbag, but it's
Okay.
about the cost of an expensive chair. Actually, not even. It's like half the cost, a couple $100. Expensive chair is like $400 or $500. I have an Aeron downstairs in the room that we call the office. I haven't sat in that Aeron for like I want to say like a couple years, right? And when I was, my co-founder and I used to work together for a while as well in the same place. And it was actually at our house early on in this business and until recently. And like, I had a beanbag there. I was sitting in my
Yep.
beanbag, right? She was either sitting on the couch or she had a desk, but it was usually the couch, right? And like over time, things evolve and like you start learning. Like for me, like it's like there's at least one, two, three, four-ish places in the house I sit. Most of them I can take my beanbag and sit there, right? In her case, she learned that like she likes to get out of the house and work out of the house, right? So there's a place called the Wing in San Francisco,
Mhm.
right? And it's a co-working spot, and she has a spot there, right? She recently got it, and she likes working out of there, putting her headphones on, working out of there. And she told me recently, I like when people are around me. It doesn't matter whether they're working on what I'm working on or not. I'm like,
Yep.
cool, like that's
Right.
great, like right on, right? For me, like it's like I like getting on video chats like this. I like getting on the phone with people. I like going and meeting people like our customers or different partners we have and talking
Mhm.
to them, right? Or like recently I did a post about the company Notion, right, which is like a,
Mhm.
a document app, a newcomer. And I went to their office that's kind of secretive, and people don't know where it is. And that was cool. And I checked it out, and I had an interview with the CEO, so I could make the
Did you
post that
did you
much
bring
better.
your beanbag?
I didn't bring my beanbag. I don't
Okay.
bring it around. And, I don't bring it around. That's a really good question. I will use whatever facility somebody has, but I don't have to
No.
sit for that long, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so that's a great question. So yeah, like I think like work is just work, and we're it's exciting because we get to have different ways of working than having to go to have a commute, go to an office, sit there for XYZ amount of time, hang out with our coworkers. I mean, there's lots of advantages to that. It's not like I'm dogmatic, like yeah, everyone has to be remote. I think remote is cool. I think distributed work is cool. I think it's different. I think it requires people to have a different level of discipline and figure out what's right for them and what gives them energy at work and gets them going, helps them focus. Like for me, literally sitting in the corner of a room on my beanbag, being able to plug in my charger, right, have whatever drinks or whatever I need around me, I'm good to go. That's me
Yep.
though, right? And sometimes I get out and go have meetings because that's me too. I like that, but I don't take my beanbag.
Maybe the next version will have like a collapsible beanbag or something that can just
There you go.
yeah. Well, listen, man, work is just work. I think that is the quote of the podcast
There you
today.
go.
Really good. I really appreciate your time. I want to be respectful of your time too. Before I let you go, where's the best place for people to engage with you, reach out, learn about whatever you're working on right now?
Yeah, sure. There's a few things. So one, I'm on Twitter. It's at HNSHAH, so Hiten Shah.
Mhm.
Funny story, just to give it to you. That was the personalized license plate of the first car that my dad bought in America. Or yeah, in
Nice.
America. Yeah, we moved here when I was 5, and so that's my Twitter handle. I've never shared that before. So there you go.
Wow. Love it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and that's also my Gmail. So if anyone wants to email me and have any questions.